in the Zoom. Oh, nice.
Thank you, Julia.
Our biggest, most stressful part of the day is forgetting to press record.
Yes.
We are recording this, so that way, if you don't catch something or want to come back to something later, you can reference different parts that maybe you just want to slow down and digest again. But my name is Emily Krause. I'm a sports medicine physician at Stanford Children's Orthopedics and Sports Medicine Center. I see a lot of female teenage athletes, female runners in my clinic, but I also do research and direct a female athlete research program called FASTR. We're on brand today. FASTR stands for Female Athlete Science and Translational Research. We're all about closing the research gap in the female athlete space, both doing the good science, but also translating that information to all of you. And so we are so pumped to have you here, both in person and virtually, hopefully throughout the country. We might have some people throughout the world. We'll take note on that. And we're here for you. So we want this to be as interactive. We want to have time for questions. If we don't get through all of our content, we'll do another session. But we really want to make sure that we save that time for you, so you get the most out of this time while you're here with us. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
There we go. So you met me, and now you get to meet my awesome team.
Sweet. All right. I'm Abby. I'm a research coordinator with the FASTR team. So I help with a lot of the research side of things with our research studies, but then also do all of our social media for FASTR. So lots of research translation. And I'm also a high school track and cross country coach at Sacred Heart here in the Bay. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Morgan. I am a postdoc here at Stanford. I'm in the genetics department, but I work really heavily with the FASTR team. I'm doing anything physiology, training, recovery, all of that is what I love to research. And like Abby, I recruited her last year. I also coach at Sacred Heart Prep for high school, and I'm a long and triple focus.
All right. I have our other FASTR team members introduce themselves.
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Mo, also was recruited to be part of the track group at Sacred Heart. So there, and I also play basketball. Serving as a FASTR group, and I also work for the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Commission. So essentially, that's just helping us win more medals for the Olympics. But excited to have you guys to game.
Cool. All right, and Julia.
Hi everyone, my name is Julia. I am a current senior at Stanford and working with the FASTR team. I'm a research assistant for the last year and just recently started part-time as a research coordinator with Abby. And
Woo!
Woohoo.
Yep, and Julie's going to be managing the chat function. Is that right?
Yes.
For all the questions that are coming through, and also letting us know if we need to speak up or tone it down or slow down or all those things.
Yep.
All right.
So super general overview of what we're going to cover. Some menstrual cycle basics, really getting into fueling your body for sport, fueling as a runner, building strong bones, and then putting all of those things together with what's called REDS.
Just a quick before that, let's get a lay of the land as to what sport event we're coming from.
Yeah.
So how many of you are in season currently?
Nice.
Some like
Everybody.
condos. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
We're almost done with season. We should be confident.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay. How many of us are long distance cross country? Anything over a mile? Let's say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, see it.
Love it. Yes.
All
Okay.
right.
How many of us are in below a mile, but more than 200 meters?
Our 4-8 people. Nice. You guys are my people.
Awesome. How many of us are below 2?
Woo!
Any field event people? Yes.
Yes.
Love it.
All right.
Yeah, that's all in track. Are we tracking cross country? Most of us. Any of us play any other sports? Shout them out. Basketball, volleyball. Anything else?
We got any soccer? Couple.
Yeah, there we go.
All right.
Awesome.
All right. Nice.
Cool.
Sweet. All right. Well, we're going to tell you a little story about an athlete named Cammie. So Cammie is a high school junior on the track team. She just moved up this year to train with the varsity team, so her runs have gotten longer, her workouts have gotten harder. She's also taking hard AP classes. She's studying for the SAT, something I'm sure you juniors are very familiar with at the moment. And with her busy schedule between school and practice, she often forgets to eat breakfast, or she just chooses that extra sleep in the morning. Sometimes doesn't pack a lunch, doesn't love the options they have at school, maybe forgets to pack snacks. And Cami started to feel like her performance at practice and in meets is kind of going down from last season, and she's not sure why, because she's training more, she's training harder than she did last year. Starting this season, her periods have kind of started to be irregular, which is new for her. But her teammates told her that's just part of moving up to varsity. It's part of just training hard. And she started having some pain in her right shin. And it's been holding her back in some workouts. And so her coach has sent her in to see Dr. Kraus for some more help. Also, this is not a real patient, so we're not breaking any HIPAA. I just want to make that clear. So I want to start by pitching it all to you. I warned my gals in the front that I would call them potentially. So is this normal? What do we think? Is it okay to lose our periods during the season? What do we think? I'm seeing some shaking our heads. No. Yeah, you guys are right. It's not normal. It may be common, but it's not normal, right? And so we're going to start back with the basics. When was the last time you guys had an overview of menstrual cycle? In the last year? Anyone? No? Last 3 years? Yeah, a little bit. Okay, so it's maybe been a while. So we're going to break it down pretty simple, just based on
How are you? I'm good.
all good.
Julie's on it.
Julie's on it. Sweet. So 3 main phases: follicular, and then in the middle we have ovulation, and then the luteal phase. So your menstrual cycle starts with your period. That's day 1. So that's when you start bleeding. And that's usually 2 to 7 days. It kind of varies. And that's the first half of that follicular phase. And you can see on here, we have 4 of our beautiful hormones going as well. And so we have follicle stimulating hormone is in white, estrogen is in blue, luteinizing hormone with that sharp spike is yellow, and then progesterone is green. And so you see kind of in the period, that's what we call like the low hormone phase at the beginning of the follicular phase. And then you see a few of the hormones start to rise towards ovulation. That's the body's preparing an egg to be released into the uterus. And that's that big drop in luteinizing hormone towards the beginning of the luteal phase. And then as you see estrogen and progesterone increasing in the beginning of your luteal phase, that's your body preparing your uterine lining for a pregnancy. And then if you don't get pregnant, your body sheds that lining, and that is your period. So obviously this cycle doesn't just end, it repeats. So the end of the luteal phase goes back into the beginning of the follicular phase. So those are our basics. But this is a pretty idealized version of a menstrual cycle. We won't go super into all of this, obviously, but this is just to show you that menstrual cycles can look a lot of different ways. And so you see those hormones that I was just showing you, not all spiking at the exact same time. So this is 9 different women's cycles. So all of these women have different cycles, but also you can have different cycles month to month. So there can be a bit of variation. So what is a quote normal menstrual cycle? Ideally, it's a period by the age of 15, and then that whole cycle length is like 21 to 45 days. So you're getting a period every 21 to 45 days. And then that period should last anywhere from 2 to 7 days. And in that first 1 to 2 years, it might be a little more irregular, but it shouldn't be super irregular. So we're going to get into more. What is an irregular period? Why does that happen? If in that first 1 to 2 years, you're having huge variations or huge gaps between periods, that's still not normal. So your period shouldn't be so irregular still in those first years. Any caveats on that?
No, I think the only thing that I just want to point out is 21 to 45 is kind of a wide range.
Yeah.
So if you're on the far end of that, it may not be like we sometimes think of a period is every time a month, it's at the same time of the month, but it may not be. And so we'll talk about this a little bit later, but tracking your cycle is important in that case, because otherwise you can't keep track if it's like every 35 days, you're going to be a little different each month.
Right.
So I just keep that in mind, that that's not a bad thing,
Yeah.
but it's something that you're going to have to stay on top of a little bit more, just so that you can keep monitoring it from month to month.
Yeah, might not be the 10th day of every month.
Yep.
Yeah. Sweet. All right. Anyone have any ideas why our periods might be irregular? Shout them out if you got them. Okay, thank you. With us, folks. Okay, cool.
First time.
Yeah. First time with in-person and Zoom. A lot going on. All right. Sweet. Diseases, infections, syndromes, things like polycystic ovarian syndrome. That's more of like the heavier, really painful periods. Thyroid disorders can cause irregular periods as well. Same with thyroid medications, actually. And then inadequate nutrition, which we have a whole section on nutrition coming up. So more on that. So what to do if your period's irregular? Just mentioned tracking. Tracking is super helpful. Even if your period's not irregular, start doing it now so that you can identify those trends over time. You can see how often your period comes, how long it lasts. And if it is irregular, we do recommend working with a doctor or an OB-GYN, and it's super helpful to have that tracking information to bring to them to show them, okay, this is how often I'm getting my period. It's only a couple days, maybe it's lighter, just so that you have all of that information. And then if it is potentially underfueling, that's the cause of this, which we saw on the last slide, that's not the only cause. We do recommend working with a sports dietitian, or if that's not an option, increasing that daily overall fueling. So that's maybe something that our athlete Cami is dealing with, saying that she's missing breakfast sometimes because she'd rather sleep, or missing lunch because she doesn't love the options in the lunchroom. So just being creative, leaning on your parents, planning ahead on how you can really get in fueling throughout the day. And then in that phase where you're working to get your period back and you're working on increasing your fueling, there is also the potential that through that time you might need to drop training volume back a little bit. So working with your coach, if your coach is here, they're probably very open to talking about things like this And so just being communicative that this is something you're working on. And so maybe, hey, you need to reduce that training stress a little bit while bumping up nutrition, getting your period regular again. Sweet. So you may notice we didn't talk a ton about performing in different phases of your cycle. And that's because we want to empower all of you that you can perform in any phase of your cycle. And so some tips on how. Track, like I said, starting with just the basics and then adding in symptoms. So things like fatigue, hunger, maybe you have cravings during certain parts of the cycle, maybe you have cramps. And then starting to implement self-care strategies as you experience those symptoms to help kind of moderate the symptoms, things that help you recover better, maybe getting more sleep when you're feeling a little bit lower energy, things like that. Because really your mindset is key. So you can still perform on any given day, no matter what phase of your cycle you are in. And yeah. All right. Sweet. Back to Cammie and over to Morgan. Yes.
Yes.
Can you maybe just describe to us why it's so important? That girls have a regular period?
Yes. How much do we want to answer versus?
Go to the next one. We will, when I start to talk about bone health and some of the other consequences of missed periods, we'll get into that. So stay tuned
Yes.
for later in the talk.
You're a couple slides ahead of us, but yes, it's coming.
Awesome. Okay, so back to Cammie. With her regular period and increased training, Dr. Kraus wants to know more about Cammie's fueling during the day and around track practice. She encourages Cammie to start incorporating more consistent meals and snacks throughout the day to better meet her energy needs and help her reach an energy balance. So, with a partner next to you, quickly try to define what an energy balance is, if you had to guess. You have 20 seconds. Okay, time's up. Does anyone want to share? Oh. Coach has to go second.
Yeah.
Athlete
We gotta
first.
have an athlete first. Yeah.
Okay, so I was talking about like a scale of like how much energy are you like expending and how much energy are you consuming through like foods?
Amazing, beautiful. Does the coach have anything to add?
Great job.
Spot on.
That's a proud coach. All right.
Yes, it's like you knew it was coming. So, it's exactly that. Energy in, which typically is food, balance with energy out. And so a balance, we want it to be pretty much the same. And so energy out could be used to power the body's normal functioning. So it's not just about, oh, I exercised, I burned a certain amount of calories. That's only a very small portion of it. Your body has to use energy to survive. So your brain needs energy. So if you think of like brain fog, or like you're taking a test and you get really tired, maybe your brain actually needs some more energy. So things like that, just for you to be sitting here, living and breathing, you have a basal metabolism that your body just has to have energy to do. And if energy in isn't enough to match energy out, this can lead to something called low energy availability, which we're going to get to a little bit later. But just think of like an imbalance of the amount that you're outputting is way higher than the amount that you're intaking. Does that make sense? Some head nods? Awesome. Okay, so adequate energy intake supports running performance and training response, because as we just talked about, not only do you need energy to just survive and maintain, you also need energy to perform. Muscle strength and development and maintenance. So not only just performance, but also how our muscles work, and not only just for like max strength, but also just the muscle function, your muscle quality of you being able to walk upstairs, uses muscles. So how can we maintain that with energy? A strong immune system is also key to try to make sure we're not getting sick often. Sleep is a big one. We talk about sleep a lot. We'll be pushing that on you to sleep as much as possible. GI system function, and iron stores and oxygen carrying capacity. If anyone had to guess, what does oxygen carrying capacity mean? Yes.
What amount of oxygen? Around
Beautiful job. For those that you didn't hear her, she said the oxygen transporting through your body through red blood cells and getting to everywhere that needs to go. So think of just like your body as a highway, little oxygen cells are in a car driving around to get to where they need to be. That's exactly what that's talking about, which is important for runners because you need oxygen to do aerobic capacity or aerobic activities, which would be running. So think of things that are longer where you need to use oxygen. For aerobic, we mean oxygen. Does that make sense? There we go. And then strong bones, which Dr. Krause will also talk about, which is why it's important for us to have a menstrual cycle. So this is it's all going to come together. Okay, so now let's talk about macronutrients. Shout out an example of a carb. What's a carb? Rice, pasta, yes. Bread, love it. Protein. Chicken, steak. Beans, yes. Yeah, oh, we have so many options. This is amazing. Awesome. All right, example of a fat. Avocado, nuts. Now I just hear grumblings. But yes, now we have examples. Awesome. Okay, so we're going to break these down very briefly, while also considering what a performance plate is. So when we talk about fueling and we're talking about energy intake, we want to make sure that you're eating enough to sustain what you want to do. And so we're going to talk about how do you build a well-balanced performance plate. So we'll talk about fruits and veggies, which are your fruits and veggies are carbs, by the way. So it's not just like your grains. Carbs are also vegetables. Proteins, carbs, and healthy fats. And so we really like to recommend eating 3 meals and 2 to 3 snacks a day. This is obviously variable based on your schedule, based on when you like to eat and what you're doing. But we just recommend always have a snack on you, have a little bar, have something that you like, and also eating foods that you want to eat, I feel like is a really big thing, especially with like social media now. It's like, oh, how can you make like this overnight oatmeal? If you don't like oatmeal, you don't have to eat oatmeal. Like you can find other things that you want, but just making sure that you're eating things that you really enjoy and that fit within like building this performance plate. And another cue is also just eat the rainbow. So when you look down at your plate, do you see colors or is it all brown? You know, maybe you see like a red, a green, that could be anything, a fruit, a vegetable, but that's another thing you can keep in mind when you're building performance plate is, do you see colors on your plate? It's a good thing to think about. Okay, first, carbohydrates. What do they do? So they can support running performance as a primary source of fuel during activity. So when you're running, your body's typically using carbs that you've stored throughout the day, throughout like just over time. And it supports bone health, which we'll talk about later. And it's very important in maintaining adequate iron stores. What does iron do in our body?
We teased it on the last slide, or a couple slides ago.
You did. Any guesses? Bones. What else? I saw a little hand. Did you have something? Yes, blood. Amazing. We'll also get into more of that. I just wanted to ask you a question. Okay, so for recommendations, carb needs are high because when you're running, you need carbs to actually be able to produce performance. And so we typically recommend 68 grams of carbs per kilogram of body weight, which is math. I know we think about food, we probably don't want to do math. But for example, a 70-kilogram athlete would require 420 to 560 grams of carbs per day. I'm going to give you examples of what this might look like. So 50 grams of carbs might be 3 slices of bread, and also depends on the type of bread too. So keep that in mind. 1 cup of dry oats, 1 cup of cooked rice, 1 cup of pasta, and 2 handfuls of pretzels. But just, we don't want to just throw numbers at you. I want you to like start to conceptualize what this might look like, just for 50 grams.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily that 50 grams is a serving, just
Right.
a representation of 50 grams. So we don't have to limit ourselves to a cup of pasta.
And I will say what I see in clinic is oftentimes the athletes, the runners even, are not getting enough carbohydrates throughout the day. Yeah. It's not just like, oh, I'm gonna eat carbs at night, I'm gonna just load it up then. You should be consuming carbs throughout the day. That's gonna give you that sustained fuel throughout the day. So don't skimp on the carbs, please.
Yes, and as a student, you need carbs for your brain. Yeah, super important. Okay, moving on to protein. Role in the body, build and maintain skeletal muscle, which is the muscles in your body, and form the base of hormones and enzymes essential to body's function. So enzymes can be proteins that are like working in your body, like little, all my little metaphors, but like just little construction workers in your body, fixing things up, making things better, producing things. You need protein to do that because those are the building blocks of, you know, those different functions. And then hormones, we talked about menstrual cycle. You need, hormones are made of proteins, so you have to intake protein in order to make hormones as part of it. You also need fats too. We won't get into it. Okay, so now for recommendations, and we will also share this, so you don't have to memorize these numbers. But a good rule of thumb is to get protein in at all meals and snacks. And this isn't try to eat as much protein as possible all the time, but it's just if you're trying to eat a little snack, do you have your carbs, proteins, and fats? So if you're just looking at it, you know, like looking at your meal, what do you have in there? And so these recommendations, 1.2 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram. And yes, everything is in kilograms versus pounds. That's the way the rest of the world works. But these can be easily converted to pounds, or you can convert your body weight. And we base it off of body weight to be relative. So it's not just a girl has to eat this amount of protein. It's variable on yourself. It's all individualized. So what does that look like? 20 grams of protein. It could be yogurt. It could be eggs, could be lentils, could be tuna, could be tofu. I think everyone said those options. So these are just examples of what 20 grams of protein looks like. Like Abby said, it doesn't mean you only eat 20 grams and you're done. We just want to give you a little idea of how much food that might look like for just 20 grams of protein. Sweet. Okay, fats. Role in the body, help maintain sufficient energy availability and hormone health. So like I kind of teased, you need fats to be able to create hormones and have that healthy energy balance, and prevents deficiencies in essential fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins. So we have a lot of micronutrients. So we're talking about macronutrients, but micro are just needed in smaller capacities. Yeah, I think that's, yeah, it's been a while since I did nutrition. But it just helps keep that healthy balance and making sure you're getting everything that your body needs in terms of the smaller things that aren't just like carbs and protein. So recommendations, this one is in percentage of daily energy intake, which is not the same as the other ones. But again, that's how our world works. 20 to 30% of daily energy intake. So like a third of your food should have fat in it. And it includes things like salmon, walnuts, olive oil, and all of those things support health and performance. So we really just want to, fat is good for you. We need fat in our diet. We need fat to perform well. And so just making sure that it's always incorporated in what you're eating. Awesome. Okay, so now let's talk about nutrition in terms of training and practice. So has anyone heard how quickly you should eat after a workout? 30 minutes, yeah? About 30 minutes? Yeah. Okay, so one myth to bust. You do not have to eat immediately within 30 minutes. It would be awesome if you could just to eat something after a workout, but I don't want to be so tied down to like a number, like, oh, I'm at 29 minutes. I need to eat now or else something bad is going to happen. That's not what's going to happen. You'll survive. But if you can, try to refuel with some carbs and protein, mainly carbs because you used it in your workout. So you just want to give it back to your body and start to refuel that. And more importantly, within this 4-hour window after a workout, you want to just get some carbs in, get some proteins in, and get some fat. Not only just to, like I said, give your body back what it used, and also because you exercise, there's a lot of things that are upregulated. So there's a lot of processes in your body that are like really active and ready to go in terms of like building muscle and other processes that are going to help in your performance. So if you can give your body the fuel that it needs to then build all those building blocks, it would be a great thing. So it's really just get something in after a workout. If you can get it right after the workout, awesome. If you have to go immediately to class and you have to wait a little bit, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. But really just want to make sure that you have food after you work out. Make sense? Awesome. Okay. And lastly, carb and protein goals. So do we remember an example of 50 grams of carbs? Yes, yes. So we want to aim for about that amount and 20 grams of protein, which is what? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yogurt, anything like that. Yeah, so those are what you want to aim for within that 4-hour window. But if you can get a snack right away, so if you feel hungry, go ahead and eat something, and then try to get a full meal in within a few hours of your workout. And then rehydration. Who sweats when they work out? Yeah, some of you don't have to. You don't have to sweat. It's okay. I know someone who doesn't sweat when she works out. It's okay. It doesn't mean anything's wrong. But that means your body is losing fluids. So again, you want to give your body back what it used. And especially if it's like a really hot or humid day and you like sweat extra, you want to drink more. So not only just water, but also electrolytes. So you choose your favorite electrolyte drink and go ahead and take that in after workout. And also during is important too. So you can get some rehydration. Okay, so now these are just some examples of like post-workout snack tips. So like some trail mix with fruit, protein shake, crackers and hummus, but these are all examples. So really just find something that works for your stomach and your GI system, and also that you like it. We want to eat food that we like. Food is fantastic. So find options that you enjoy, that also hit these check marks for requirements, if you will. Soft recommendations. Sweet. Okay, so to wrap up, fueling your body. For parents, helping provide balanced meals and help your athletes plan ahead with snacks with ample carbs and proteins. We work with high schoolers. We know that you guys would rather sleep than eat breakfast. And so what can you do to just throw a bar in your bag or just add something to what's your, to your schedule that is easy for you to do? And getting the support from your parents or guardian or whoever's at home. For athletes, listen to your hunger cues, even if it's not the time you typically eat. And there's a little asterisk there, that sometimes you might not have a hunger cue when it would be potentially a good time to eat. And so those are things that if you want to kind of expand on that.
Yeah, sometimes you have to train your gut to fuel at different times when your body really needs it, even though you might not be craving that post-workout. I mean, sometimes the workout itself can suppress your appetite, but that doesn't mean you still have those fueling needs. And so I think that sometimes I get a response of, I'm not hungry. I don't have those hunger cues. And so I don't feel the need and I forget to fuel. And so then you have to train your gut, and it can be more challenging. And that's where sometimes the dietitian can be helpful, but sometimes just being more consistent with your fueling so your body is used to that. And sometimes even like breakfast, for example. Some athletes are like, I'm not hungry in the morning, or I have stomach upset if I try and run right after I fuel. There are different strategies that we can use to find different foods that are a little bit more easily digestible, even just like a banana or something that you can start with just to get some fuel in the tank before you get out the door.
Awesome. Planning ahead for busy days at school. We get it. You guys have a lot going on. What can you do that you can just make little pre-mixed bags of trail mix or whatever that is for you, and just keep some in your bag, in your locker, and you'll be like, oh, like when am I going to eat that? Probably when you least expect it. So it's always nice to just have something in your bag that you can grab, even if you think that you're going to have time to eat. Refueling throughout the day, including post-practice. So like we're talking about, if you can just eat something throughout the day would be best, and then train your gut, as Emily just mentioned. Sometimes changing your nutrition can be hard. If you're trying to eat a little bit more, your stomach might be uncomfortable. It might just there might be a little bit of discomfort there. But also just have patience. Your body will adapt. Your body is extremely intelligent. And if you try to just nudge it in the right direction, it'll just take a little bit of time for you to train your gut. And then for coaches, reiterating the importance of your athletes fueling the work they are doing. So just reminding as they're leaving, hey, eat dinner, hey, eat a snack, or like encouraging them to eat lunch, and just being like that strong advocate for making sure your athletes are fueling. Or even if you have at track meets, if parents want to bring snacks, or even just encouraging your community to try to provide snacks for your athletes, because they're typically hungry and so they just want to eat. So trying to provide as many opportunities as possible within your community to support that. All right, transitioning.
We have not forgot about Cammie's shin. Don't you worry. All right, so, I wanted to start by getting a show of hands. How many of you have heard of shin splints? Everyone, okay. All right. How many of you have heard of a stress reaction? Okay. How many have heard of a stress fracture? Okay. How many have heard of a bone stress injury? Oh, okay. All right. So maybe I should just wrap up mine right away. I feel like you already know it. No, but for Kimmy shin pain is commonly referred to as shin splints. I feel like it's the common language. Hear about shin splints. Some athletes have shin splints every season, which I hear about when they come into my clinic, and always hard to hear because that's not something that is fun to experience during training. But what is it really? So let's start with some conversations around bone health. Healthy bones are dense and strong, and we like healthy bones, especially in growing adolescent, teenage females and males. Bones store important minerals and allow for mobility and protect against injury, like bone stress injuries. And we found that, so we measure bone health through a scan called a DEXA scan, and that measures bone mineral density, which is one indicator of bone health. We found that the lower values of bone mineral density on those scans are associated with greater risk of bone stress injuries. And we'll get into bone stress injuries, which encompass stress reactions and stress fractures. Why we find this as an important topic to talk to all of you about is that 90% of peak bone mineral density is acquired by the age of 20. So I would say over half of the group here is under the age of 20. So you are still in your bone building years. And that's why we really hit hard the importance of bone health and how we can optimize bone health during these years. So back to what is a bone stress injury. So this is the inability of a generally normal bone to withstand repetitive loading, leading to localized bone weakness and pain. Running is an example of repetitive loading. So we think of just the repetitiveness of running and the impact on that bone from each step to step. And so if an athlete is increasing their volume too quickly, that might be an overload of stress on those bones and can lead to an overuse, a bone stress injury. If that bone is compromised for some reason, that can also lead to a bone stress injury. And we'll get into what does a compromised bone, or why does an athlete get a compromised or unhealthy bone. So most bone stress injuries, interestingly, are not a stress fracture. So I threw around the name stress reaction, or threw around stress reaction, stress fracture. And so that's along a spectrum. And so which do you think has a fracture line or an actual break in the bone? This is not a trick question. Stress fracture. But often, if there's not a break in the bone or a visible break in the bone, it's actually a stress reaction. So it's almost like, we use the example of a paper clip. I don't know if you use paper clips anymore, but they are out there still. And if you bend the paper clip, it can get weak, but there's not always a break. But if you continue to bend the paper clip, it'll eventually fracture or break. So you can kind of picture a stress reaction as that weaker paper clip. So the stats show that only 1 in 5 athletes presenting with a bone stress injury actually have a stress fracture. Thankfully, that's a good sign, because if we catch it earlier, that means that the overall time to heal is going to be much shorter. So the sooner that we can get it diagnosed, the sooner that we can manage it, and the sooner that you can get back off to running your PRs and races. So this is just hitting it home again. Bone stress injuries, I use a lot in the clinical setting, because we're trying to shift away from stress reactions and stress fractures, and also shift away from shin splints. Because shin splints can be confusing, because it sounds like it's something minor, but sometimes shin splints can be a stress reaction or a stress fracture, and that can be a much bigger deal and lead to a lot more time away from sport. So I usually say low grade or milder bone stress injury and a high grade bone stress injury with a fracture line. So just some terminology, and feel free to ask questions about it, because it can be confusing if you're like, do I have a stress reaction? Do I have a stress fracture? Why are you using the word bone stress injury? And so that's hopefully can kind of encompass bone stress injuries, capture both stress reactions and stress fractures. Okay, so what are some risk factors for bone stress injury? So there are some internal risk factors, and there are risk factors internally that you can both change and not change. We call these modifiable risk factors and non-modifiable risk factors. Those that you can't change include sex, race, age, genetics, alignment, prior injury. So a prior bone stress injury does put you at risk for a future bone stress injury. sex, females are at greater risk for bone stress injury, which is why we're spending a good portion of this time talking about bone stress injuries. Some of these other modifiable or can change risk factors include strength. How many of you do strength training as part of your running training program? Yeah, all right. So I'll try and simplify this, but if you think about loading the bones and the repetitiveness of running, and if you think about ways to offload some of the pressure and the force that's going into the bone, the muscles, stronger muscles can help offload that. So if you're building muscle strength in your hips, glutes, calves, kind of anywhere below the hips, you're actually helping offload some of that bone stress. So think about that as far as helping your bones through strength training. If you're running fatigued, we can get into this, but if you're having a lot of like your training volume's gone up a lot, you may have greater fatigue, and that may affect how your biomechanics and how you run your running form. Flexibility, if you're running really tight, that might also lead to some extra load and pressure into different areas of the bones. I talked about biomechanics. Stress, again, we talked about stress and the stress buckets. And then REDS, which I'll spend a nice slide on, so we'll talk about that, but that stands for relative energy deficiency in sport. And then poor recovery, so maybe training too much, too many days per week, and then nutrition. We touched on that a little bit, and I'll touch on that again in a few slides. Other can change external factors, footwear, kind of a hotly debated topic as far as does certain footwear increase risk of certain types of bone stress injuries. I won't get into that debate today, but I'm happy to share more. Different training surfaces, if you're just purely training on pavement, trying to find ways to mix it up. Sometimes it's hard based on just what's around you and your environment. So trying to find ways to modify and maybe incorporate some more cross training if you need to. And then training load, like we talked about, too much too soon. And then also intensity within that. So sometimes when I have athletes that I've cleared to run and get back to sport, they'll want to go fast all the time. They just want to try and accelerate their training and just run fast and try and get back into shape. But that's more load and more intensity on the bones. So I'm like, you got to be chill, easy, conversational pace. Everything should be pretty low key. And your fitness should actually come from more cross training at the beginning, especially with bone stress injury recovery. And then if you look in the middle, all those combined factors really increase that risk and allow kind of create this cumulative risk score and risk profile. So tying it all together, these are very busy, complicated figures, and we're not going to go into all the detail, but I wanted to talk about this concept of relative energy deficiency in sport and REDS. And just by show of hands, how many of you have heard of REDS before? Okay. How many of you have heard of the female athlete triad? Okay, kind of an old school term, but still used, and I still use it, and I still think it's important to understand both concepts. So relative energy deficiency in sport, you remember when we talked about that energy mismatch or that energy imbalance? So that can lead to low energy availability. And if you can see, I'll even use my cursor here, that there's a low energy availability in the middle here, and that can lead to all of these different consequences. So you may not be able to see here, but the circle on your left are all the different health consequences that can occur from low energy availability. The circle on your right are all the different performance consequences from low energy availability. So down below, where's bone? Somebody help me, yellow, up above. So you can see impaired bone health is one of the many consequences from low energy availability. Why we talk about it so much is it's often the one that presents to my clinic, and it's often the one that is a devastating season-ending or half-season-ending injury for athletes. And I think it's the one that we can really prevent if we catch and address some of these issues early. And sometimes how this presents might be a little different. And I think I might have like signs of low energy availability on this slide. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so how do we know if Cami has low energy availability or relative energy deficiency in sport? So some of the different health indicators that we usually see, and usually the questions that I ask in my clinic to help me be a detective and put all the pieces together, because I will also say diagnosis is a constellation of symptoms. You have to put all the pieces together. It's not like, for example, with diabetes, you can use the hemoglobin A1C or a specific lab test that can help us say, you have this or you don't have this, or a blood pressure test that says you have high blood pressure or you don't. And so we have to put all the pieces together like detectives. Some of the health indicators include irregular or absent menstrual cycles, like we talked about. So now we know, without getting too much into a science class here, that the low energy availability causes suppression of certain hormones that help lead to regular periods. I'll keep it at that. If you want to learn more or have more questions about it, we can give you a deeper dive. You could also get different stomach or GI issues. And this can be without other diagnosed concerns. So sometimes people have GI issues for a number of different causes, but sometimes it can be from like a GI intolerance. It can be affected by different absorption. So it's an interesting presenting factor, and usually one that I don't see as frequently, but it's something to definitely bring up. Trouble sleeping, fatigue, irritability, trouble concentrating. I've had athletes who sometimes are presenting factors, they're just more irritable to their parents. And it's hard because sometimes teenagers can have those irritable moments, but if it's more consistent and it's frequent, it's maybe something to think about as far as fueling strategies and that energy imbalance. And then recurrent injuries. I talk a lot about bone, but it could be other muscle or tendon injuries from that fatigability, lack of using all those builders to repair. And if they aren't working properly, that's going to lead to other injury risk as well. Some of those performance indicators, a little more vague, could be just decreased endurance performance. There are a lot of different causes of decreased endurance performance, but one of them is low energy availability, decreased strength, and impaired coordination. So I just wanted to hit home on this because not all bone stress injuries are caused by low energy availability or REDs. We talked about other factors such as training volume, kind of switching, even going from, I mean, for Cammie's picture, going from a JV to varsity, and that training difference can sometimes be enough of that overload to send them into that injury risk profile and that injured state. So it's something that I don't go directly to. I try and tease out all of these other questions as well and all these other potential risk factors for bone stress injury. So building strong bones, takeaways. For parents, what can you do? So I think back to the nutrition piece too, supporting proper fueling in your athletes. I'm encouraging multi-sport participation. Something that we don't talk about, or we didn't really talk about much, was there were some raise of hands with basketball and volleyball and soccer. And I think it's something that I still find important is we talked about load and repetitive loading of running, but it's not actually a high impact sport, and it doesn't do a lot of multiple direction movements. Well, it shouldn't, unless you're running away from something or playing some other running game. But there's value in playing multiple direction sports or multi-direction sports like soccer and basketball, because it can load the bones in different directions. And I think it's also nice to just take that time off or that off season, and whether it is a structured sport or whether it's some different like HIIT training or some other type of strength training, I think it's important to just mix it up and take a little time. I mean, we all love running, and I think running is my first love as far as sport, but I know the importance of other sports and diversifying my sport repertoire. As far as athletes, prioritize fueling your body. We talked about all the different strategies, the macronutrients and the timing of that fueling. One other thing that I just want to hit home is really thinking about within day periods where you might be underfueled. So not skipping that lunch, not missing that like pre-workout or pre-practice snack is super important. If you're without food for 3, 4, 5 hours throughout the day, you might be your tank might be too low, and you might be putting yourself at a slight risk of that energy imbalance and energy mismatch. We really encourage strength training that's building your bones, can also protect you from other injuries, overuse injuries, both tendon, soft tissue. And then really important, I talk about taking a rest day at least once a week. And especially for developing athletes, at some point, you may be training 7 days a week, but I really think taking advantage of that rest day, and a rest day isn't a swim and a bike ride and 4 different things. It should be a pretty chill day to really allow you to recover and get back to your training, so you're really refreshed for that first day of practice or next day of practice. Then for coaches, Incorporating regular strength training into all of your female athletes training programs, not just specific events, specific distances. We're just seeing more and more the benefits from strength training, and teenagers can lift weights. And I think that's important and a myth that we want to make sure and dispel. And then training volume, build that gradually. Athletes respond to different training volume differently, so just keep that in mind. And I know it's tough with big teams, but I'm doing your best to understand some of that variability. So a really important takeaway that I think we just want to hit home is that prioritizing the athlete's long-term health is the biggest goal and will lead to performance gains. And that's something that I talk with the athlete about. I talk about the parent, like let's think about the long game. I know you want to get back as soon as possible. Cammie, I know you want to get back to your race next week, but there's the long game. And if you want to be a lifelong runner, a lifelong athlete, we need to think about addressing all the potential contributors and the risk factors now. And the sooner that we address those, the better the long-term trajectory is for your performance career. Ooh, so we're gonna pass things over. Is it time?
Yeah, well, we're just gonna wrap up.
Oh, yeah, we're gonna do Q&A.
Yes. Yeah. So we talked about all these things that like might happen in terms of training and like all these like multiple variables. What we didn't really talk about is just taking care of yourself. And so Mo and I are kind of going to tag team this, and it's something we call Mind Your Six, which is kind of like watch your own back. Yeah, like Mind Your Six is watch your own back. That's what we like to say. It's very easy to remember. And so I'll kind of have Mo kind of go through these, but how can you take care of yourself first before considering like all these other variables?
Yeah, so I like what you were saying. We talked about, we walked through a lot of complex factors today. And so if we just boil these down to the basic ways of how you do it.
Mo, can you be in front of the mic? Yeah.
Hustle. Sure, everyone gets
Hustle up.
My fault. So just talking about how, no, I feel aggressive now, guys. So when we talk about what does it really mean to take care of yourself? And the first thing is sleep, right? Like, what time does school start for most of you? Who's still sleepy when you yeah, right? You guys need sleep, and that's okay, right? That's part of it. And so I know some schools sometimes have late starts for you guys to get a little bit more sleep. But who's going to sleep early enough? Raise your hand if you're going to sleep early enough. Okay. A lone warrior. Perfect. So there is some of that we won't always be able to change in terms of how early you have to wake up. But I think as we go through these, one of the most important things that I really want to hammer home is be able to explore what works for you. So you know that if you usually go to bed at midnight and you wake up at 8:30, you do not feel great, right? Give yourself a chance by going to bed a little bit earlier and then see how you feel. That's just targeting sleep. Sunlight, we are tied to the sun. All of life on this planet is tied to the sun. Get outside. Ideally, if you can get outside before 11, I know that sounds random, but the way that the sun works, get outside early, soak in some sunlight. Your breath being third is the simplest tool that you have. We all run. You know, you're running hard, you're training, and you're like, I can't breathe, coach. I want to stop. That is one way. Has anybody done meditation? A little bit of breathing, a little bit of mindfulness, maybe? How do you feel after mindfulness?
Oh yeah.
Good, thumbs up,
Yeah.
thumbs up, right? And so sometimes when we're doing things throughout our day, like training specifically is the most obvious example of when you're working really hard, how your nervous system essentially is going to be more challenged. On the opposite end of that, we want to put our bodies in a space where we bring all of that down. And what we don't always if you guys have experience with playing with your breath, that there are moments just in the day, small little pauses that you can take. Maybe that's before a test. Maybe that's just going from one class, the bell goes off, just a nice deep breath. Everybody take a nice deep breath. It just does something nice to you. Third, we've hammered it a little bit, hydration, right? So, four, my bad, movement. We know how well movement is. 2, Dr. Krause's point, every so often you do need a rest day if you're working really hard, but there's value in movement, and how we perceive movement is more important than anything. if you're exercising or you're training during practice and you always see it as work, having to do something, you can also do other movements that you enjoy. Maybe that's just taking a walk, right? So it's allowing movement to span a spectrum of how you engage with it. You might like to jump rope, but track practice or cross-country practice doesn't really do it for you. So having an emotional relationship with movement is super valuable to being able to explore, again, different things. I mean, you might like bowling and that's cool, you know? Hydration, water, we need water. Another, it's very similar to the sun. We need it in our lives. Drink it often during practice, probably every, 15 minutes or so that you need water. Get it in early and often.
We're essentially bags of water, so.
That's it. We're just little bags of water, especially babies. And lastly, nutrition. I think we probably had about 6 or 7 slides just on this in itself. Okay. Eat, fuel, eat what you like. If you don't know what you like, try something different. Whether it's breakfast, lunch, have something else with your Skittles. Okay. Something from the earth. Okay. And so when we think about these things, right, even this is 6 of these things, maybe a lot to kind of consume at once, but just take one thing. I'm going to start with a breath practice when I transition from one class to the next. Boom. That's plenty. That's enough. And then you test that. If it works for you, great. If it doesn't, I want to do something else. And just go with that. Does that make sense, everybody? You guys? I'm focusing on the group over here. My bad, parents. My fault. Yeah. That.
Awesome.
Put it in practice. Put it all together.
Okay, oh, yes. That's a lot. I talk loud. So now putting it into practice, starting with parents, encouraging that multi-sport participation and being an advocate for your child, which I'm sure that you are. It's just the reminder of sometimes an athlete be like, hey, this kind of hurts. Believe in them. Like, just be there and advocate, especially for coaches or for people outside of your community. Just always advocating for them because they know their body best. You know your body best. We know ourselves the best. And really just being an advocate, and even for them when they're not an advocate for themselves. So just reminding you of that. For athletes, always feel enough. Be kind to yourself. It's my favorite thing to say. Always be kind to yourself, and always listen to your body and honor your unique needs. So your teammate might be doing something where you're like, oh, maybe I'll try that, and it doesn't work for you. That's okay. That doesn't mean that it's wrong or that there's a problem. So just honoring your unique needs and respecting that everything is an individual process. So, and we heard a lot of us say like, it depends. And that's true. It really depends on what you're experiencing, and what you have access to. And then for coaches, have the conversations and talk with your athletes about periods and about feeling. Like I think our goal is for, girls to be able to walk down a hallway with a tampon in their hand and be okay with that. And so as coaches, being able to just provide that safe space where athletes can maybe not always share all this information, but feel safe and comfortable in that environment, not only about these sensitive topics, but also for practice, is a huge thing. And just keep girls in sport. That's another big thing that we are in.
And being here and encouraging your athletes to attend this talk is a great
Awesome.
start. So thank you. Thank you, coaches.
And if you ever need help having these conversations, we have some starter guides for you. On our website, we have handouts, pretty much about everything we just covered. I actually have some as well that I can put in the back that you can take on your way out. That is specifically for female runners. And so now we will turn it over to all of you. I think Julia's going to check out the Zoom chat too, but let's start in the room. Any questions? We covered a lot. Yeah.
So what if you're suspicious that there's bone stress injury? What is the first course of action?
Yes. So I'm going to repeat that for the Zoom room. What if you are suspicious of a bone stress injury? What are your first steps? Whether it is going to the doctor or where to go. I think oftentimes if there's a concern, let's say shin pain, tibial pain, and it's just started, usually I recommend to kind of play the take a few days off rule, maybe take 2 or 3 days off of running altogether, and maybe do a cross training, a bike or some other form of rest, whatever is accessible. If it returns after a test run, not like a hard workout, but maybe like a 20-minute jog, and it returns, then I'd say make that first appointment. Ideally, an x-ray will be done. Sometimes when the bone stress injury is really early, it's hard to detect. And so sometimes we'll say, our suspicion is a very low grade bone stress injury. So let's take 1 week or a period of time off. If it returns, either come back in or we may move forward with more imaging at that point. So I think doing something and not having that athlete trainer run through it. Sometimes it's hard to tease out muscle soreness from bone soreness. That's my job, to try and tease out. Sometimes a hip injury can be a hip flexor strain. Sometimes it can be a bone stress injury of the femoral neck, and that's two very different management approaches. So the goal is to try and run pain-free. I mean, sometimes running hurts, but it shouldn't be hurt and localized hurt.
And just like also something to add, and similar to that for coaches and just for training, doing things barefoot, doing things like different calf stuff, like anterior tib, like just doing some of like that, they call it like prehab or rehab work, banded work, glute work, anything adding in like pre-run or post-run will be really helpful in being able to prevent those things, not only because it's building muscle, but also just, we talked a lot about like your biomechanics and how your foot strikes the ground can also be like a really big indicator. And so if we can get stronger feet, then that will have positive impacts. But yeah, I'm always recommending just some barefoot work on some grass or turf would also be good, or even at home.
Yeah.
Questions?
Yes.
Yep.
Between like red and so
Yeah, good question. So is there a meaningful difference between REDS and low energy availability? So it's a little confusing because REDS captures this whole constellation of health and performance effects and impacts. But the underlying or the foundation of as far as the overall cause is that low energy availability. So 1 or 2 days of an energy imbalance probably isn't going to send some athlete into that red state or in those kind of checking all those different boxes or like through all the different spokes of that wheel. But I would say 5 to 7 days or a couple of weeks the athlete may start to have some of those impacts. The challenge is some of those impacts might be more hormonal impacts or things that we can't really measure, or you may not even be able to feel or experience yet, but it's starting to happen. And so really staying on top of fueling. And I think especially in stages of puberty and transition, we didn't even talk about puberty. We thought that could be a separate talk in and of itself, but your body's needs are going to change as you're growing, as those different functions are, and those systems are needing more fuel. So that's something to also think about, that you can't compare like your 9th grade version of your body to your 11th grade version of your body and those needs, because they are going to change and grow. And you want that process to change, and we want to allow that to happen. So not the same, but low energy availability feeds into REDS. Yes.
What do you recommend for iron?
Ooh. I knew we were going to get an iron question. We were like, do we add iron slides or we just wait for an iron question? The question for the Zoom room, what do you recommend for iron supplements? So I think this is a pretty hotly debated topic and something that's talked about a lot at the high school level. Does everybody supplement with iron, or do we tailor that based on an athlete's needs? There are some challenges and some dangers of blindly or blanket supplementation without getting a measure of those iron stores. So my stance is I ideally like to encourage athletes, if they're runners, because of being a runner, there is that risk of iron deficiency just from the intensity of the training load. Sometimes heavy menstrual bleeds can also lead to iron deficiency and a number of other different causes. Sometimes inadequate iron intake, whether it's an athlete that practices a vegetarian or vegan diet, or just doesn't eat as much red meat. I don't discourage any of those diets, but I think it's important to know and be aware that they might be at greater risk of an iron deficiency. And so usually I try to get iron levels through a measure of a ferritin, which is a measure of iron stores. And if they don't, sometimes I'll also just get a CBC or get a hemoglobin and hematocrit level to test for anemia. If those levels are low or low normal, and my threshold for ferritin is 35. So anything under 35, I would recommend supplementing. And that's not always the case with some pediatricians. So I think just understanding that and kind of using that information. And as far as the type of supplementation, iron supplements, I don't have any associations with any industry or any brands, but I've liked Nature Made over the counter is a good one. Sometimes it can cause some GI distress. There's another brand called Thorne, spelled Thorne. That's really good. It's an iron bisclinate form. And those are the ones that I would probably start with. There's also some liquid iron supplements as well if there's more significant GI issues. That's like the micro version of the iron lecture. Other questions? Ooh, yes.
You talked about like the energy window and how to continue food after practice or exercise, and I was wondering, is there like any biological reason why you may not feel like immediately hungry?
Yeah. So the question was, is there a biological reason why you might not feel hungry right after a workout or training, even though it's important to fuel during that window? And oh man, as far as like a really good scientific biological reason, I may fumble on that a little bit, but I would say as far as certain, like when you stress your body through a hard workout, a run or an effort, oftentimes you have different systems, autonomic systems. Your parasympathetic and sympathetic system are working in tandem, and so that can change the blood flow throughout your body. I'm trying to simplify this as much as possible, but some of that blood flow isn't allocated towards the gut. It's going towards the muscles and other parts of your body. So then when you stop your effort and the blood flow returns, sometimes it just doesn't feel good to fuel right after that, even though it's totally safe and okay to fuel. So a lot of it's like blood supply. And is there any other causes?
Hormones. So like your hunger is regulated by hormones. And so those are up or down regulated. And so exercise can down regulate those hormones. There's also like I think it's a molecule or.
Because we're at Stanford, there was a presentation. Early last year.
Yeah. So there's like a new, I think it's a molecule. It's called lactate. But anyways, with exercise, it can impact your hunger levels. So there are things, all that to say, there's things happening in your body that do suppress your hunger. And it's typically like different like proteins or hormones, and then also blood flow, which is like another thing. When you sleep, your blood flow to your stomach is very small. So I would just, in terms of fueling, like we talk about, like trying to get as many meals as a day, I would also recommend avoiding eating right before you go to sleep. So like if you eat a really big meal and then you try to go to sleep, you could have some GI distress as well. And that's purely because there's not enough blood flow to your stomach because it's doing other things like repairing your brain and working on memory and all those other important stuff. So just adding that in there. Do we need a transition?
Is there a question on the Zoom room?
There was one good one. What do you do if you've never had a period?
Ooh.
And you're a high school athlete?
So what do you do if you've never had a period and you're a high school athlete? That's a good question because sometimes there can be delays, genetic or other causes, anatomic causes for not having a period. And so I think when an athlete presents to my clinic and has never had a period, and she's in the 15, 16 plus year age range, I'll start to ask some questions based on some of the questions that we talked about as far as what's your typical fueling day look like, see if there's any potential fueling errors that at play. But then we think about other potential contributors like thyroid function and other potential indicators like medications. But I think that I often will get labs pretty quickly. So I'll do a lab workup and that will give me a lot more information in my detective case to see what the next steps are. Because if a lot of hormones are suppressed, it might lead me down one way. If there are a lot of hormones that are elevated, it might lead me down a completely different pathway. And then I may end up referring that athlete to a different specialist, like an endocrinologist or an OB-GYN doc. That's a very simple, quick version, but I think it is worth that at the age of 15, 16, if an athlete hasn't had her period, it's worth bringing up that conversation. Sometimes pediatricians are like, let's keep monitoring, let's see if it comes soon. I will say what not to do is just starting on the pill or the birth control pill. That might be an option in certain for other issues like heavy bleeding or menstrual cramps. But if an athlete hasn't had a period, just putting that athlete on the pill is is limiting the potential or limiting the extent of the workup that really needs to happen. And so if that is happening, maybe take a step back and pause and say, is this the right direction that we should take? And maybe there's more information that we need to gather.
Sweet.
Right.
All right.
You're a little over time.
We're a little over time. If there's more questions, we'll be around. So especially if you're in person, you can come ask us. Yes. But we will be sending out the recording of this too. So for everyone on Zoom here, if there's people on your team who missed it, you want to send it to them, we'll be sending that out, which will be from our FASTR email. So if you have more questions, you will have our email.